And I think we're live. I would love to see some stuff in the chat to see if you folks can hear me. And yeah, um, hopefully I'm coming through picture wise and sound wise okay. Um, so So you all are free to talk in the chat if you want to talk to each other, if you want to throw stuff in for me to see. I'm going to check the chat in between talking about different asexual related pieces of fiction that have ace characters, for better or for worse. As you'll see, some of the examples are not so great. I guess before I actually launch into it, I should just say, not really ground rules, because I think everyone knows how to behave. Like, we're not going to invalidate each other. We're not going to come here and troll. But also, just so that you know, since I'm going to be talking about some pretty specific examples of asexuality in fiction, a kind of like blanket spoiler warning is in effect for this video. So hopefully, if I'm going to talk about something that you really didn't want spoiled, you'll be able to kind of estimate when to come back in, just like mute me or something. It looks like we've got okay, some people in the chat saying hi. Hello. Thanks for coming in. This video, of course, will also be available for playback for those who couldn't be here. Um, and yeah, I'm going to talk about some examples of asexuality in fiction, and I will probably ask, as long as I remember, if anybody has seen or read the example. If you have your own thoughts on it, feel free to put that in the chat. And if you're watching this later, you can talk about them in the comments. I'm really curious what other people, either, non-asexual people or asexual people, what you thought of the ace representation in some of these examples. And if you have some that I didn't cover, I found kind of a ridiculous number of examples, and some of them are things that I have seen or read, and some of them are not. I will do my best to talk about the things that I have not personally seen by referencing just reviews and things that people have said. So, but I would like to go ahead and get started. Hopefully the sound is all right. It's hard to tell. So, all right. I am going to actually start first with um, television shows, and later I will go into books. So, but the first one that I want to talk about that has an ace character that a lot of people know about this one is BoJack Horseman. I have actually never watched the show. And people keep telling me that I should, especially because there's, it's mainstream ace representation and it's nuanced and complicated and pretty authentic. But I've also heard it's kind of a depressing show, so I don't know if I'm ready for that, but I would like to check it out someday. I just don't know when and if I actually ever will. But so I'm going to talk about what I know about this, and if anybody has thoughts on BoJack Horseman, I would love to hear those. Um, so, all right, so BoJack Horseman is an American animated show that is, I guess, centering on the life of an anthropomorphic horse. And he used to be a sitcom star, and now he's dealing with depression and alcoholism. And his closest friend and former roommate is a guy named Todd. And Todd is our asexual character. Now, is the representation on the screen, is it explicit? And the answer is yes. um, so in the third season, Todd was on a date with his sort of, I guess, girlfriend-ish person named Emily, and she expresses that she feels like he doesn't really like her, even though he does seem to like being around her. And she asks him if he's gay, and he says that he's not, or rather that he thinks he's not. And he's not sure he's straight either. And he says, like, I think I might be nothing. um, and sometime later in the fourth season, I think, there's this scene where BoJack is like admitting to sleeping with the girl that he kind of liked. And so Todd is like, yeah, that was really crappy behavior, but I don't know if I'm allowed to be in love, which is like, I mean, it's really awful to hear that some people, I mean, it's relatable for some of us, like, oh, do I deserve this? Do I deserve a relationship? Um, like the idea that they're putting up with us. Um, and Todd comes out to BoJack in this scene, and BoJack does receive it really well, and he says it's amazing, which is nice, you know. And Todd just sort of starts like affirming himself and saying how great it feels to say it out loud. Um, and so he kind of BoJack tries to like make some jokes about it, and Todd isn't really ready to like joke around about it. I mean, he's just kind of getting used to saying it. Um, and and also they're kind of not on the best of terms right then, so he doesn't really want to joke around about it, but he does want to talk about it. It's a very interesting kind of relationship as far as I can tell. And in the 5th season, Todd meets another asexual person and starts like dating her and starts learning more of community language and the difference between asexuality and aromanticism, which like to me that's really incredible that a mainstream show had so many opportunities to talk about this in a sort of realistic context, even though you're dealing with like anthropomorphic animal people, which Todd is not. But I don't know, it's all very weird. But I guess eventually he and the other asexual person find that the only thing they really have in common is that they're both asexual. So, I mean, that's also relatable to a lot of us because those of us who date, which does not include me, but those who want to date or do date, sometimes they think like it would be a lot easier if I just found another ace person. And then you realize like, but you still have to be compatible on all the other stuff. So it isn't that simple. Um, I think Todd also, just from what I gleaned, he had to kind of hide that he was asexual around this girl's family because she wasn't out. So there was all of this. And the girlfriend, Yolanda, I think her name was, worried that there just isn't anyone out there for her. And that maybe even if they have nothing in common, at least they're both asexual. And Todd just he doesn't want to be defined, he isn't like defined by being asexual in the show, but it is like a big integral part of how the character relates to the world. So that's what I'll say about that. um so all right, just checking in with the chat. It looks like at least folks that have their sound on can hear me. Let me know if I need to be louder. I'm not sure if I can make it louder, but um all right. So, let me go to the next show example. Okay. This is another one that I do not watch, but it sounds interesting. It's called Legends of Tomorrow. And that is a DC spinoff with like 7 seasons or something. That's always very intimidating to me. It's set in the Arrowverse, and it starts with like a group of superpowered people who use like a time travel ship to stop a tyrant from taking over Earth in the future. And there's a bunch of time travel hijinks where like various people are trying to protect timelines and fight various antagonists across time. So the asexual character in question is Esperanza Cruz, who is also known as Spooner, and it is confirmed in words on screen. She has like a coming out scene. Um, she's supposed to have had some kind of childhood encounter with aliens that allowed her to communicate with these certain aliens or something. And so she gets really close with this other character named Zari, and they have a sort of casual conversation about Spooner's asexuality. Like Zari is asking her to play that game. I think in this version that they called it Smash, Marry, Kill. Which, if you haven't played that, that's like Smash is like of the 3 people that the person is about to name, you have to say which one would you smash, aka have sex with, which person would you marry, and which one would you murder, you know? So, um, and they're supposed to give you 3 choices, and you have to assign each of those people regardless of, like, how you feel. You have to pick one to marry, one to have sex with, and one to kill. And, her friend names 3 men, and she's just kind of like, I'm just not really into any of them, honestly." And you see, like, the wheels turning, and she's like, okay. So how about" and she names women, so and then she has a similar reaction. She's like, "No, I don't think so." So she's trying to, like, dig around for, like, what her type might be, and she just says she doesn't get those types of feelings for anyone. It's just this really sort of soberly rendered, like, "Dude, I'm being really honest with you. I don't think I feel that way about anybody." Um, and then she tries to kind of play it off like, she seems worried that it's weird, and she starts playing it off like, "Oh, maybe the aliens messed me up." Um, and Zari's like, "Oh, no, no, that's very normal. Maybe you're just ace." And she says that. It's like, "What's ace?" And she gives kind of like a succinct explanation of what it is. And she includes the phrase like many of them want to be in relationships, but that it just depends. And Spooner agrees that, "Well, I guess that makes me ace." And she's like, "Oh, did you just come out to me?" And it's I like that was so casual, but also really just very honest, just very you could see that it really moved her. Like, she's like, "Oh my gosh, there's been a word out there for this all this time, I just didn't know." And the closest thing she can think of to kind of give context to it is, I have to claim that aliens might have messed me up because that's what makes more sense than just being ace. But I love that her friend just kind of supported her and was just like, "No, this is a normal thing to be." Um, and I also like that, um those of you who have had awkward coming out experiences or have done activism, like, I'm sure that you've probably heard people say, "Why would anybody have a problem with asexuality? People aren't just walking around asking you about this. The only time that you would ever have problems with this is if somebody asks you about it, or if who would be asking you about this? You must be walking around broadcasting it, right?" And the truth of the matter is, somebody might just walk up to you and be, "Okay, so smash, marry, kill." And then that conversation starts. Like, I think that some people underestimate how often people are going to ask you, "Who do you like?" or "What's your deal?" Even if it's not, junior high school. So, um, so that was Legends of Tomorrow, and the character was Spooner. So, yeah, that's about as much as I have to say about that because I have not actually watched it. I did watch some of the scenes with the character, including the coming out scene, and I thought it was handled pretty well just from what I could tell. I did like it, and I thought the acting was good. So, and I tend to like science fiction shows. I don't know how y'all feel about this, but I have trouble with time travel. Like, time travel shows always just give me a headache. I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that. I love science fiction, but time travel specifically, just I have trouble with it. So, let's see. I'm gonna go on to the next one. Let's do Sirens. This was an American sitcom that, let's see, was it 2 seasons? I think it was just 2 seasons. And the character who was asexual was named Valentina, and she went by the nickname Voodoo, which I'm not sure how people feel about that. I've heard that some people think that's kind of a weird thing for a white lady to go around calling herself, but um, I haven't watched the show, so I don't know if it's handled uh, how it's handled exactly. But I guess because this character is kind of into some macabre things, that maybe people nicknamed her that because of beliefs about that system. But anyway, she is explicitly identified as asexual on screen. We're batting 3 for 3 here with explicit representation. So Valentina is like everybody on the show is EMTs. They're ambulance people, and there's an EMT named Brian who is interested in her. Um, she's not, like, one of the main characters, but she, like, is in another crew or something, and he is interested in her and kinda tries to go for it, and some other EMT is just saying, "Oh, dude, don't bother, she's asexual." And she won't be receptive to that. So, I mean, he takes that home and he does some research, this guy Brian. He does some research on the topic and he comes back trying to like impress her with how much he knows about it. It's like, oh, did you know that the symbol for asexuality is a triangle and blah blah. And she's kind of dismissive about it. She's like, I am asexual, but I don't march in pride parades or anything. I don't really know that much about the community, which I think is interesting because a lot of times people who are ace, we're presented like, especially if we use that language about ourselves, or God forbid that we have any micro labels or additional romantic orientation labels, that we're probably some kind of activists. We spend a lot of time on it. Not that that's a bad thing or anything, but I think that a lot of ace people just want to be ace and they don't really get involved in the community except to the extent they might need like some counseling once in a while, or some go to a meetup once in a while. um but yeah, that was how she presented, and she was very forward about being asexual, but she just said, yeah, I don't get into any of that stuff. And so he kind of fumbles around, like, trying to find common ground by claiming, "Oh, I'm sort of asexual too, because like I'm celibate because I don't have a girlfriend," like, and that I really like that. That gave her a chance to kind of shoot down the misconceptions. I mean, how many of us have been in that situation where people just assume it means you're not having sex right now? Ugh. So, but anyway, she she's very adamant that she does not do sex, but it turns out she is actually interested in dating. So, they have this really awkward exchange where he kind of tries to play it off that he's not hitting on her. And he's like, "Oh, I bet men hit on you all the time." She's like, "Oh, no, no, I exude a vibe that I would kill them if they did that." And he's intrigued, he's interested, but he's not sure if he could manage to be with a woman that he couldn't have sex with. But he gives it a good try. I mean, it's not the most well conceived of ventures, because his idea is just like, we'll be able to be a typical couple except that we won't have sex, and I'll transcend my sexuality for her because I like her. And like, this is where it gets a little weird, and this is where I didn't actually see any of this footage, but I guess it goes that she's interested in him as long as he's very clear about he doesn't ever expect to have sex with her. And so I don't know how clear they are about the link between celibacy, abstinence, and asexuality. I mean, it's one valid way to be, but I don't know that they really had any on-screen explicit like shooting down of the misconceptions of that. But it's Valentina's choice about her sexuality, that she chooses not to engage in sex, and otherwise she does want to do kind of normal date things. But then she kind of like acts like she doesn't really believe him that he could give up sex for her, so she starts like putting him in compromising situations, like she makes him go to a strip club, or she starts like sort of coming onto him really physically, and he has to admit like, yeah, I still like sex and it's not going to work. um and then she gets jealous when he dates someone else. I don't know, it's not like that couldn't happen, but it's still, sometimes when you see complex, nuanced, asexual characters who aren't necessarily handling it the best, you also have to balance that against, well, there's not a whole lot of representation still. People might get the wrong idea. And I heard someone describe this show as very broy, broy. So um I'm not too surprised that a lot of it was fixated on whether sex was part of the relationship, but I don't really know vibe wise beyond that. Um, so I'm glad that they don't set it up so that Brian pursues her and like talks her into it. I was glad that didn't happen. So, let me check in with the chat. Oh goodness. So, um, all right. Someone in the chat is saying that they used to watch Legends of Tomorrow. That's cool. One of my friends said the same thing. That he stopped watching shortly before, like right around the time this character was introduced, so he didn't know that she was asexual. That's really cool. Um, yeah. One person is saying sex is not a choice for me. It was never an option. And same. I would never consider it. I think that it's fine if people, I understand it's a behavior, but for some of us who are asexual, it's just like it's off the table, period. It's, there are compromises I will make to be around certain people and everything, but I mean, I don't even date, so I have to probably deal with a little less of that kind of expectation. But yes, there's nothing wrong with saying like it's just not in the programming. It's a no go. It is a deal breaker. So, ah, let's see. I am going to talk about something I have seen. But first, I am going to wet my whistle real quick. Mm. So, let's see. Um, I am going to talk about the TV show Huge. Um, I have been talking about this for kind of a long time. I did really, really enjoy it. I think it only got 1 season, which is a real shame. Um, it was a United States show about, like, young people going to fat camp, which sounds like it would be awful, but it's really good. And what was really good about it, of course, is that everybody, like, all of the main characters are fat, and so it's not like, oh, there's one fat character and that they're all being, made the butts of jokes or whatever. Um, Obviously, fat camp is kind of like a really awful kind of situation, but everybody in the story kind of has a different relationship with their body, with weight loss, with their parents, with each other, um, and, like, there are some people who are just like, "Screw body fascism," and, is there against her will because, her parents sent her there. But, it's such a nice opportunity to see people with bigger bodies just, like, living and having stories, and, it sucks that there's just almost nothing out there like that. But anyway, one of the camp counselors is named Poppy, and she is asexual. And, it is confirmed on screen, but it's kind of throwaway. It's like a throwaway line, and I maintain that, like, we need some of everything, we need completely incidental, one-off, one-line kind of asexuality, and we need people who have whole ass storylines about it, right? Um, we need some of everything. We need the ones that border on preachy, and we need the ones where it's a non-issue, it's mentioned once, because that's how everybody else's sexuality is. So, um, yeah. Um, so the character Poppy is she's really cute and sort of she's described as sort of like fairy-like. She's very whimsical. And at one point, her ace scene is when she's sitting there with another camp counselor, and they're showing the campers like a movie that's like a teen romance type thing. It's like it might have been Twilight or something. I don't know, but they're all watching it, and Poppy just kind of like admits to the other counselor and says like, I never got this. I never understood this kind of thing, and it wasn't relatable for me. And she said, I basically identify as asexual. And the other counselor says, like, what? And she says, yeah, yeah, I never felt those kinds of things. And it sounded kind of like she was also describing aromanticism because it was a romance they were watching, but she didn't use that word. She just said asexual. So I think it was conflated a little bit, but it was cool that the camp counselor reacted like he seemed a little surprised hearing that word, and then he was just like, "Oh, okay." There was no attempt to interrogate her or ask her what happened or anything. It was nice to just see it be a four-line conversation, and never have it the fact that it was never revisited is, of course, a little disappointing for those of us who wanna see on-screen ace rep, but it's cool to see that that's just part of who the character is, and it's not front and center, and she's a minor character as well, so, it was a really good show, though. Um, I, uh, I do recommend it if you think that sounds cool. So, let's see. Hmm. Seems like some of the people who are joining in, are new to the community or new to Ace Week, so welcome. I hope that this is awesome for you guys. Um, all right, so let's see. Uh, wee. I'm going to talk about another thing that I've seen a lot of, which is a soap opera called Shortland Street, and this is also one I've been talking about for a long time. Shortland Street was a soap opera from New Zealand about people who work in a hospital. So, I mean, being a soap opera, it's like got a billion storylines and a lot of drama, and just some things are totally ridiculous. But what's really cool is there is an asexual character who has a very explicit, long, multifaceted asexuality discovery storyline in a soap opera. That is really cool. And the character's name is Gerald, and he does have on-screen confirmation, like a lot of it. And poor Gerald is trying to date Morgan, and he's worried he's a disappointment because like he's not really excited about sex with her, and he's just feeling like something maybe is wrong with him and maybe she deserves better. And he's just kind of he's freaking out on her a little bit because he's really in his head about, why isn't he attracted to her the way that he wants to be? And you just see him kind of like typing into his computer some kind of query like about why don't I want sex, or am I an asexual being or something, but it starts to come up with like real results on the internet about asexuality, and you just see him like clicking on these things going like, wait, what, this is a thing. And then you just kind of see him later, just he comes over to her house and he's drunk and he's like, guess what? And um he seems to feel really sad about it at first. He feels like he's kind of lost something. And I think that that's relatable for some people too, especially if we've kind of bought into what people try to tell us about asexuality, that we'll be alone, or if we do want to date, that we're going to struggle to find someone. I mean, it's hard, but it's a soap opera, so it's very dramatic, and the guy gets drunk and he's all like, "Oh." Um, but later he learns more about like a local ace community, and he um was telling somebody else that sometimes he thinks about men and sometimes he thinks about women. And so they're like, "Oh, that's biromantic." And they're talking about terminology and stuff. And he does um have some relationships with men, and that's really cool. The one, I think, downside about the presentation of Gerald is that he's a germaphobe and has OCD, and that's not like it's not like some of us are not like that. I mean, obviously, there's ace people in the community who have those situations, but, I worry about that conflation. I mean, I think it's positive representation because 'cause we're all multifaceted, but, especially if this is somebody's first exposure, I do worry about them associating those things and thinking that asexuality is a phobia or is related to the germaphobe thing, or that it's not a real sexuality because he deals with some pathological issues. And, it's I don't know, it's a mixed bag. But I think that just the fact that he exists and the fact that there are other asexual people who are not germaphobes in the show and are not OCD, and I think that it strays far enough away from making it seem like these are things that always come together, or that they're bad, or that one is a symptom of the other. Um, there was also the fact that when we met Gerald's mother, she was like this very forward sexual woman. She was kind of like, I think she was like an erotic writer or something like that. and you kind of get the idea that he was sort of triggered by it. And so, I don't know, they might have been doing like a low key childhood trauma kind of thing, a sexiverse situation from childhood experiences. But, you never know. And like I said, every human being is complicated. And I think that it's really important that, especially when you have characters who are given enough time and space to develop and have multiple layers in these shows, that they can still do justice without stereotyping, and I think that's really important. So, um, yeah, I agree with one of the comments that is on the screen right now in the chat where it says, if there's more quantity, the quality of ace characters doesn't matter so much. I mean, 100%. That's similar to something that I've been saying is, if you have some of them getting a happy ending and some of them not getting a happy ending, then people will stop associating one of those things with that group. Um, so anyway, let's see. What is next? I'm going to give a little shout out to the Owl House, which some of you may have seen the Owl House. It's fantastic. It is um, on Disney, and it's an animated series. Um, let's see. Well, a little bit about like what it's about. This isn't the ace part of it, but there's a human teenager named Luce, and she is super obsessed with fantasy and magic, and she ends up accidentally going through a portal into the demon realm instead of to camp. And she kind of gets adopted by a witch named Ida. She's the owl lady, and she decides she wants to like learn magic, and she ends up going to this magic school, and she gets some friends. And it's a little different for her because she isn't a witch like naturally, so she can't do the magic that they can do. But anyway, she bonds with some other kids, and one of her enemies kind of like becomes her friend and then her girlfriend. So Luce is bisexual. On a Disney show, she's explicitly uses the word bi and wears like a bi pin and stuff like that. And her girlfriend is gay. But anyway, the ace character is not confirmed on screen. I think that's the first one that I've done that isn't confirmed on screen. But Ida's sister, Lilith, is confirmed off screen as an ace arrow character. It's like, word of God situation. So she was confirmed to be aromantic and asexual during like this charity live stream that the creators were doing. And they did like an in character reading of a letter where the character says that she rejects anyone who is romantically interested in her because she's not so interested in romance as her peers and her family. And she says, I don't think I ever have been. So that's pretty cool. um, but yeah, I like the show a lot, and I think it has a lot of other good positive representation as well. It has like a couple of non-binary characters, and one of the non-binary characters is a love interest of one of the other characters. I don't want to spoil too much, but yeah, it's great. Um, the non-binary character uses they them pronouns. And one thing I don't know how much of how many of y'all care about this kind of thing, but just as an aside, I really like when animation has story arcs that are not just about children or very young people. It's nice that Ida, the owl lady, is like an older woman and she has a whole character arc and she has a love interest. And, her life isn't over just because she's like middle aged or whatever she is. I don't know how old she's supposed to be as a witch. But anyway, um, so let's see. I'm gonna say another one that's like been confirmed off screen too. Y'all know I love Steven Universe. Like, check it out. Yeah. There's a character in Steven Universe who was confirmed by one of the storyboarders as being an Ace Arrow character as well. It's Peridot. No surprise to a lot of people who watch the show. If you never watched Steven Universe, I I don't know what to say. But anyway, um, yeah, it's great. And, Peridot is an interesting example because in the show, like, they don't use a lot of words for anything. No one says straight, no one says gay, so no one says asexual either. So it's not that out of line that they don't explicitly talk about it, but it's a little complicated because it is considered a children's show. It's like for a slightly younger demographic, and you know, a lot of the adult relationships are, they just don't include a lot of explicit stuff. Um, but the the characters do a thing where they blend together and become another character. They do fusion, and for some of the ones that have like a romantic relationship with each other, their fusion is also like their loving relationship. Whereas some of the other ones that do fusions that are not romantic, it's just, it's a different kind of relationship. It's a friendship, it's a family relationship, it's a work partner kind of thing. There are a lot of different kinds of fusions. So the ones that tend to spend the most time together are the ones that want to live together as a couple. But there's a scene where Peridot has never done fusion, and she's offered a chance to do it, and she's kind of interested, like, academically in it, but when she actually gets in the situation, she's like, "Yeah, no, I don't wanna do this." And, obviously, there is some comparison there with, there's, uh she's curious about it in an intellectual sense, but she's not interested in being a part of it. So fusion is not like a one-to-one thing with sex or with relationships or romance or anything like that. So obviously just the fact that she doesn't want to fuse doesn't mean that she isn't that would make her an aromantic or an asexual character. But we do have confirmation from one of the storyboarders who was an asero person themselves, said, I know this is word of Saint Paul, but um, Peridot was being written as an ace arrow character, and she's also, not about fusion. So all three of those things can be true. So, um, but the characters in Steven Universe are like the alien characters. Like, they are not from a race that reproduces sexually anyway, so they're all kind of asexual, I guess. They just don't really have a reason to have sexual attraction because, like, what is sex even if you don't, like, have a body that does that? But they definitely experience romantic attraction, so that's, Anyway, um, let's talk about Heartbreak High. Um, Another one I have not seen. It's on Netflix. Heartbreak High is some kind of reboot of an Australian series. The series follows, like, the students and the teachers of this high school, and they have, like, stuff about racial tension and, high school romances and, you know, the kind of things that teenagers get up to. And, there is a character named Cash who seems to be like an ace character. It's not confirmed with words as far as I could tell. But Cash is like kind of this bad boy type that you'd kind of expect in a traditional uh, show, that he would be successful with the ladies, but he's romantically, at least he's queer. And we see him being attracted to a non binary character named Darren. And Cash only likes to go as far as kissing. And Darren is kind of confused about this and asks if Cash, like, doesn't want to have sex with anyone or just with them. And he states, like, he's just not wired to like sex, and if it goes any farther than kissing, he doesn't enjoy it. So he's kind of implying that he has done that and really found that he's not into it, and he wants to know if Darren would be able to be in a relationship with him if they didn't have sex ever. And Darren seems to find that upsetting, so Cash asks to remain friends. And later he makes like a showy love confession and they kiss, and apparently he struggles with both like his queerness and his sexual reluctance on in the show. Obviously, I'm not so big on, suggesting that anybody who doesn't want to have sex is therefore asexual, but it seemed like it was a general statement about how he prefers to experience intimacy, but he does like kissing. So that's something that a lot of people find relatable. So there's that. Let's see. Oh, I see some more uh, suggestions in the chat. I hope we get to talk about some of these. So, all right. Some people are finding some of these characters quite relatable. Um, I want to talk about Heartstopper. I have seen all of Heartstopper. It is on Netflix. That is kind of a whole host of queer teens are in an English secondary schools. They're kind of like figuring out their various romantic issues. And the main focus is on a gay boy named Charlie. And he's like growing his relationship with a bisexual guy named Nick. And there's a seemingly straight guy named Tao who is trying to do like the friends to lovers thing with his trans girl classmate, Elle. And so, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going around, but the asexual character is Isaac. And Isaac is kind of like there's like a group of four that were like very tight knit. It was Elle and Charlie and um, Tao and this guy. So Isaac is kind of like the fourth wheel kind of situation. Like he's never involved in any of the relationships, and he seems to be happy to just be there, and he's always reading. And he doesn't say a lot, but just, he's always there. He's an important part of their group. And in the second season, he has an explicitly confirmed asexuality storyline on screen. Before that, he's just hanging around with the friend group, reading even at parties. And he's not like excluded or teased or anything for any of that. So later, this boy named James, who is gay and also kind of a bookworm like him, takes an interest in Isaac, and um, they have a lot of common interests, and they're enjoying getting to know each other. But then James kind of tries to make a move on Isaac. It's very sweet. Like the show feels very wholesome most of the time, and Isaac is kind of wondering at this point, like, how am I supposed to feel? And he ends up having a kiss with this guy, and he's just like, I feel like, something is wrong. Like he just doesn't understand why he's not connecting the way that everyone else seems to do just so easily. Um, and he actually figures it out while he's reading Angela Chen's book, which is very on brand. So, actually, while I was watching this with my friend, I saw Angela Chen's book Ace in a display in the background because they're in the library a lot. So there's like a queer book display, and that book was on there, and I was like, "Hey, I see that book. That's Angela's book." So I got to have some input on that. It was pretty cool. So that was exciting. Yeah. Let's see. I'm going to talk about another show that I have only heard about, but I did like watch some clips to try to get an idea. So, there is a show called Sex Education. I don't really know that much about what it's about. I know it's on Netflix. But the asexual character is someone named O, and O is a student sex therapist at a college, and she has this kind of like ongoing rivalry with one of the main characters. Um, I think his name was Otis. And So she's supposed to be she gives off this vibe of, like, she's very trustworthy, and she presents herself as very, very broadly knowledgeable about, sex education and relationships. And then this Otis guy, like, they're kind of competing for a similar position, and Otis sort of destroys her reputation by pulling some skeletons out of the closet and, like, reporting that in the past, O has kind of disappeared on people that she was dating. Um, just disappeared on a previous partner, and that's not exactly something that a well-adjusted sex therapist giving advice to others would want to admit having done? So when Otis is, like, revealing this past, like, other people start speaking up, and it's like, "Oh, that that happened to me too with her." And she just ghosts people. And so, O ended up kind of countering this by saying, "I I figured out that I was asexual, and I was still figuring myself out when I couldn't handle those kinds of relationships. Now I am much more well adjusted with my situation, and that I needed to go through all of that and figure out who I was. And it's not uncommon for asexual people to be confused and to find relationships very confusing and difficult." So that was how that went. So let's see. I'm going to glance at my comments, see if there's anything that people are saying. Um, yeah. I see that some other people enjoyed seeing that book in Heartstopper. All right, next I'm going to talk about a show called Shadowhunters. And I don't watch shows like this because I don't like blood and there's vampires in it. I guess I don't like violence, and I just don't watch a lot of stuff that has a lot of violence in it. And if I am watching shows with violence in them with someone else who has seen them, I always appreciate if they can tell me, like, when to look away. I don't know. There are some things that are okay. Like, I mean, if I watch like a fight or something, there's not a lot of gruesome stuff in it. That's fine. But I don't like, torture or just watching extended displays of human suffering. Not great. So, yeah. Shadowhunters is a supernatural show that is based on mortal instruments. And there is an ace character named Raphael. It is mostly confirmed on screen. I'm not sure if you would count it because they didn't use the words, but it was from context. He's describing asexuality. Raphael is a super hot vampire, and he's got a lot of chemistry with this shadow hunter named Isabel. And Raphael, like, straight up isn't into sex, and the two have this bond because I guess he drinks her blood, and that creates some kind of bond between them. So they kind of get, like, addicted to each other. Like, it's portrayed like it's an addiction. And she wants to combine this with intimacy, and he doesn't want that. He wants to engage in what they're doing, but sex isn't part of the equation for him, and he doesn't want to do that. And her first thought was like, "Oh, so is this because you're a vampire? Like, is this just you don't want to have sex with me because you're a vampire? Is this a vampire thing?" And he's like, "No, no, I was always this way." Um, and he also doesn't say that it's about her, that it's everyone. Just he doesn't want to express his feelings through sex. And, you know, um, it's nice to have a character who is just he's super hot and all that, and but he's asexual, and, like, women are sexually attracted to him, but he is he's not interested back. There's always this common trope with those of us in real life who have conversations about this, that people will be like, "Oh, maybe it's because you're not attractive. Maybe it's an excuse." And, I've heard that from people for a very long time, just, which is funny because the other half the time I'll hear people say like, "Oh, what a waste. You're too pretty to be asexual." So I'm like, "Which is it?" But, ultimately, it's not about who is attracted to us. It's TV. But anyway, this woman is really into him, and she does decide that doesn't she's like, "I really wanna be with you, and if we aren't gonna have sex, then that's an acceptable sacrifice." She's interested anyway, but, um, yeah, he doesn't really wanna do that either, because like, I mean, you don't wanna I don't know, I mean, you want her to have agency, but he knew that it would be an issue, and also that their relationship was built on addiction, and he didn't want that either, so I don't know. I don't really know how it ended up, but I think they didn't wanna end up together. I think also the book author confirmed that he's asexual even though he didn't use that word. I think I read that. So, oy. Well, that was a lot of TV shows. So I'm gonna talk about books. Hmm. But before I do, I'm going to look at the comments, and one person is saying, "I've heard both of those comments in regard to aesthetic attractiveness for the person identifying as ace." Um, yeah, yeah, me too. Chemistry being one of those loaded words. Yeah, it really is. And it's very interesting where we can say, like, "Oh, I'm attracted to you," but not mean sexual attraction. And, we still might have other reasons that we find someone to be broadly attractive, right? So, anyway. Well, I'm going to start off talking about book things. Um, and I'm going to start with a book that I have read, which this is fun. Did any of y'all like to listen to Night Vale? Welcome to Night Vale, the podcast. If you didn't know, they also have books. So there have been several Night Vale novels, and there is a book called "The Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your Home," which is a Welcome to Night Vale novel by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor. And this was, I think, book 3. They're all unrelated to each other except that they're all related somehow to Night Vale, but, it is the life story of the faceless old woman who secretly lives in your home. That's what they always call her, and, if you're a Night Vale listener, you may remember her as a one-time mayoral candidate for the town. It's historical fiction in an alternate realm, and it kind of leans a little bit into horror, but I could deal with it. It begins in the 1700s, and the faceless old woman was once a young woman with a face. So she ended up collecting a crew for her pirate ship, and one of them was the probably Ace Arrow character, who is a fella named Andre. And his sex and romance situation is just described, so it is not confirmed with those words. But I think those of us who are especially aromantic would recognize ourselves in some of this. Andre is kind of his role in the pirate crew is he's actually like the person who provides a distraction while the strong pirate and the thief pirate are like doing the pirate stuff. So he doesn't get off on being the distraction, like, he's not being duplicitous about it, or try to reel people in with his hotness, but, I love that his storyline isn't about, like, sitting around waiting for someone to love him for something more than his beauty, like most super hot characters, in books have a storyline like that. His family is trying to marry him off, and that's also rare for male characters. he's actively uninterested in romance, not just like lukewarm on it. And nobody in the story, this is really important, is that nobody in the story is like wishing that he wasn't aromantic. Like none of the people that were um close to him, they weren't saying like, man, it really is a shame because he's so hot or whatever. Um, so aromantic people who are not asexual and or aromantic people who do desire sex, like sometimes they're thought of as like love them and leave them kind of philanderers, you know? And they're treated like they only want to use other people for sex, but like it's never implied or stated that Andre wants sex or has sexual attraction. So he may also be asexual and abstinent. So from context, that seems to be the case. And it's nice to see also that like this trope didn't show up. Like he's not awkward, he's not antisocial, you know, he's a very just gregarious person. Um, and he just happens to not want that in his life. It's like a non-issue for him, except for with his family that wanted to marry him off. So he ran away, you know. I'm gonna read a quote. Let me get my quote. For some of these, I have quotes. For most of them, I don't. But I'm gonna read you this quote. All right, this is about Andre. The family must have been pleased to have a baby as beautiful as Andre, who became a child as beautiful as Andre, who became a man as beautiful as Andre. Early in his life, they introduced him to the work of negotiating and glad handing with clients, and he took to it like beauty takes to a mirror, making others more charming as they reflected his charm back at him. When it came time for him to start courting, the consensus was that he had his pick of Paris, as long as he picked from the few correct families, of course. After all, what woman would not want to be with man of his panache and wealth? But Andre had no interest in women, which led to worried murmurs until it became clear that Andre did not have any interest in men either. Andre found people exciting and wonderful to be friends with, and he had no interest in romance with anyone. This was not an absence from his life, and it was nothing he regretted for a single breezy, smiling moment. His life was not better or worse for who he was. His life was the only version of himself he could be. Isn't that great? I love that description. And even though they don't use the specific word, I just really love how that nailed this specific personality it's very specific to him, but it's also relatable to a lot of people. Incidentally, the rest of the book like had some really cool representation of character types you don't often see. The strong person on their crew was like was a woman, and there was also like a master of disguise who was a I believe she was a Jewish lesbian. It was really interesting to see that sort of thing in books that were set in the 1700s. So, yeah, it's really good. Um, so Next, I'm gonna talk about Protector of the Small, which I have not read but has been recommended to me. It's about a character named Kell who is pursuing knighthood, even though it's mostly reserved for boys, but now girls can do it, and she does it, but she faces a lot of pushback because of course she does. And of course she has to be better than the boys and do that while facing worse conditions, and never, you know, she can never be emotional about anything because then they'll be like, oh, a girl is crying or whatever, so they'll try to use that against her. So the main character is Kell, and she is the ace character. It is not confirmed in the book, but it is confirmed by the author in the FAQ section of her website that Kell is aromantic and asexual. I don't have any quotes or a lot of elaboration on this one. I just kind of got the feeling from reading about it that this was a character that was very much sort of married to her quest to be who she was, which is also relatable. And I don't know if she had relationships at all, but um, yeah, I don't remember if there was anything about her getting shipped with people or whatever. But yeah, she's confirmed to be an aromantic asexual character. I don't know how y'all feel about the confirmation outside of the story. I know some people are really against that. I know some people would much prefer to see it on screen, which of course is very helpful. But I don't mind if it's incidental. And I also think that is very helpful in understanding characters if their creators are living people who are willing to comment on it. I'm not so big into like when it's used as a retcon or when it doesn't make sense or when it's done for brownie points. But I think that, when somebody is willing to talk more about a character when it didn't make sense to put it into the story, or maybe they've done some more thinking about the character after it was published and they have more insight. I love hearing stuff like that from authors. So that's pretty cool. Um, it looks like someone was saying, wants to know what the previous selection was. There's a couple people who said that they wanted to know what it was called. By the way, after this is published, I'll go ahead and list all the examples in the info if you need to come back and look for these references. But the one that I was talking about that had Andre, that was called The Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your Home. So, I mean, and if you Google Night Vale books, you'll recognize which one it is. It's really interesting. It's a really good book. I've read 3 of them. I don't know if there's more than that now, but I read that one most recently. So, yeah. I am going to talk about the next one on my list, which is, let's see, Quicksilver by R.J. Anderson. I don't think told you that the last one, isn't that a by Pierce? I think Protector of the Small was Pierce. Anyway, Quicksilver is by R.J. Anderson, and this is not one I have read, but it's a young adult book featuring a female engineer who's got like this past, who's trying to, catch up with her. She's got some kind of weirdness to her genetics, or maybe she's alien or something. I don't know. It was unclear in my description, and I didn't want to be too spoilery anyway. But so she's like trying to start over, and she's still being tracked by somebody who means her harm. The character's name is Tori, and she is explicitly identified as asexual in the story. Um, Also, one of the things, like, what's maybe the opposite of a pet peeve? I don't know if there's a word for this. Like, something that I love when somebody when it's in a story is that this character gets to have a conversation about, how they hate the phrase, "just friends." Um, yeah, I love that because I hate the word "just" in front of friends, like, that the idea that if somebody has a friendship versus a romance, that the romance will always be more, will always be better, will always be like you turned up the volume, and I'm like, "It's just a different song, it's not louder, it's not better." Um, but of course, people who experience romantic attraction, they sometimes will describe it as like a different flavor than friendship, and that's how I would think of it as well. But, there are a lot of people out there who, if they're in a sexual or romantic relationship with someone, they'll just be like, "Well, this outranks everything else in my life, and if I have to fire my friends or isolate myself to only keep my significant other happy, I'll do it." It's absurd the lengths that we encourage isolating ourselves with a significant other sometimes. And I don't know. I mean, obviously that's unhealthy, and most people who are in healthy relationships don't do that. But how consistently the jealousy is upheld as like normal to that extent, it's ridiculous. Um, so in the story, the friendship is prioritized. It's really emphasized in Quicksilver, and she has a Tori has a relationship of some kind with a character named Milo, and the book doesn't force it to become romantic by the end, which I also appreciate. Um, I know that there was like this worry that because this character was suspected of being having alien DNA or something like that, that they were worried about, the relationship between aliens and asexuality. Just some people will say that that's a very harmful trope, which of course it is. But the author had made a statement about that they were aware of that and that they hoped that this did not stray into that category. So anyway, I have a quote on this one. I'm going to read you the quote. All right. So she says, I went out with Brendan because it was what he wanted, I said. I thought if I tried to act like a real girlfriend, maybe I'd start to feel like one. That I'd want him to kiss me and put his hands on me instead of counting the seconds until it was over. But I never did. Oh, said Milo. I mean, it didn't help that he was a selfish pig who wouldn't take no for an answer. I would have broken up with him anyway, even if I'd liked the physical stuff. But going out with him made me realize that I wasn't shy or uptight about sex. I simply wasn't interested. So, um, and then I think I have another quote. So she says, I'm serious, I insisted, stepping in front of him so he'd have to look me in the eye. I hate it when people talk like friendship is less than other kinds of, as though it's some sort of runner up prize for people who can't have sex. I had a boyfriend once, but I never liked being with him the way I like being with you. I held his gaze, refusing to falter or look away. You're one of the best friends I've ever had, Milo, and that is everything to me. Yeah. It's very explicit, it's very sort of wordy for dialogue. It might even kind of feel like the philosophizing is going into preaching or something, but I want that message out there so bad that I don't care. So, mm, so let's see. I want to check in with my chat and see who else is talking about interesting things. Oh, people like Night Vale. Yes. I'm glad. It was really good. Um, yep. Uh, what else do we have? Um, okay. Oof, sorry, I had to scroll back to see some of these comments. Ooh, all right. I'm going to tell you about a book that I did read. I'm kind of going back and forth between things I've actually personally read and things that I haven't. Um, so, have you people heard of Young Wizards? That is a series by Diane Duane. And I remember reading these when I was a little kid. Like the first 3, I think, were out when I was a little kid. And that was in the 80s. So, but yeah, there was like I think a big break after the 3rd book. And then the 4th one came out after a long time. And that now there are at least 10. I have read all of them and like a book of short stories. And there's probably more since then. But book 10 of the Young Wizards series is called Games Wizards Play. um, so um, the story itself is about like the main characters of the whole series is mostly these 2 wizards named Nita and Kit, and they're wizards, and they are often they're a boy and a girl, and they're straight, and since they met when they were kind of, I think they were preteens or just barely teenagers when they met. So when they became like wizarding partners, it really wasn't going in the direction of will they or won't they, but definitely as the kids got older, it was kind of like, are they going to date? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I don't know how I feel about this. But anyway, they're now like more established young wizards, and they're in this book, they're working as mentors in something called the Invitational, which is like a spell competition that finds new talent, like younger wizards, newer wizards, and pairs them with like the more experienced ones to develop the useful spells and encourage innovation. And so, in between that, Nita and Kit are continuing the will they or won't they thing that I was talking about. But there is an asexual character, a very minor one, a character named Lissa, and it is explicitly mentioned on the page. I have a lot to say about this one, even though it was comparatively minor. The series after, I mean, they're all pretty big books. We're up to book 10 at this point, and there's a lot of background characters popping up, like, all the time. There's just, like, a lot of cameos to kinda tell you what's been going on. And in this one, it seemed like there were a lot of background characters popping up to announce they weren't straight, you know? Maybe not a lot, but I generally like that, but it started to feel a little bit infomercial-ish. Um, and Nito was kind of the point of view character in these, and she sometimes acted like it was such a big deal to find out she knew someone who wasn't straight, and she's accepting, but it just basically blew her mind both of the times that it happened in this story. And it kind of felt inappropriate because considering that this wizard situation is like this interplanetary, like she meets aliens all the time, right? Like considering the diversity that she encounters on a daily basis, uh, you know, human queerness seemed to blow her mind more than that. Um, and it also had this whole sort of almost a vibe of like, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I can't believe I didn't know he was gay. And that is an emphasis that I sometimes see with some straight people. I'm sure that it accurately represents how some straight people feel when they're just like, "Oh my god, I didn't know." But what that sort of models for you is that you kind of assume everybody's straight by default, and it's shocking when they aren't, even if you don't mind, you know? And I guess it leaves a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. I mean, it wasn't bad, it was just I'm not a big fan of that kind of presentation, and you never hear them being like, "Oh, this person has a cross-sex partner. I had no idea they were straight." Um, it it shows that on some level this is shocking to you, and, you know, you were assuming straightness until proven otherwise, which is problematic, you know? Um, but anyway, this, one of the characters who pops up turning out to be asexual is Lissa, and even though, like, a lot of the stuff that Lissa says about her life is an authentic representation of one way a person can be ace, I worry that it was kind of presented like this kind of relationship is what asexual people do. This is how it works. And it didn't do a great job not conflating it with celibacy or aromanticism. Like it was all kind of mushed together a little. It's kind of realistic in some ways that a character would present their experience as typical, obviously, if they're not there to do like an education session, right? They're just talking about themselves. But whenever you kind of tiptoe into representation like this, um, you have to be pretty careful about what you say and how you say it. And they're just like we were talking about earlier, there just aren't enough examples yet for the generalizations to survive as useful representation, if that makes sense. So I would have appreciated kind of less attention on it, and less time out for Queer 101 and straight girl having an "Oh my god" reaction, and more just plain, like, nonchalant inclusion of queer characters with queer relationships as opposed to queer characters who show up mostly to have their conversation about that and leave, if that makes sense. So, anyway, um, so, um, yeah, if, it looks like at least a couple of people in the chat may not, may have followed this link from somewhere else and, uh, may be hoping that I will present a belated explanation of who the heck I am. On YouTube, I am known as Swankivy, and I've been doing awareness videos for a very long time, but I'm also the author of the book, The Invisible Orientation. So that would be published under my author name, which is Julie Sandra Decker. So I do have a book. It's been out for almost a decade, which makes me kind of go, where did the time go? But yeah, that is nonfiction though. So I can't plug my own stuff to say that it has asexual characters. Although I should just say, as an aside, that I know that I have some creative writers and some writing adjacent people, people who do comics, people who um, make creative works that may include asexuality represented authentically in their work. And I would love to know, just if you want to type in the chat with each other and also share with me if you are working on any kind of project that includes an asexual character, talk about it. I would love that. I have an asexual character related book in progress, but I've been saying that for years. It's kind of been on the back burner for a while. But if I ever get it out there, the working title is Ace of Arts, and it's about a high school um, lesbian asexual girl who is trying to get into art school. And it's pretty cool. So that's going to be a friendship book. Like, that's going to be about kind of discovering asexual identity, but it's going to be mostly about her friendship with a boy that seems very confusing to a lot of people, both inside and outside that relationship. But yeah, I really want to write about friendship. I think we need more books about friendship. So let's talk about Loveless by Alice Oseman. I actually just started reading this. I'm like that far in. Um, this one has been a little controversial. I think most people liked it, or liked at least that it existed. And Alice wrote Heartstopper, the graphic novels, as well. So I don't know. But it's about Georgia, who is a girl in an English secondary school, has never been kissed. She's 18, feeling a little left out. And she's always loved the idea of love, but actually falling in love herself or engaging in any of the physical activity that she associates with it, any of that kind of intimacy, that's a whole different thing. So Georgia is confirmed in story to be asexual. And it turns out she's also aromantic. She's both aro and ace. And she has a lot of experiences that many of us in the ace community have had, for like being judged for not being experienced. And also, like, having negative reactions to sex. She seems like, from what I've read so far at least, she's had several on-page reactions to, like, sexual content or coming, seeing people kissing or whatever, and she's just like, immediately she's just like, "Ew, ew," which I don't necessarily like, but I also acknowledge that some of us feel that way, like, and it does seem to be mostly in her head. She's not, like, walking up to people and going, "That's disgusting," or anything. She's not shaming them to their face. It's just that seems to be how she feels about it. She likes the idea of it in a fanfic, but she doesn't actually want to do it or see it. So what else? Also, one of the things that has happened so far and apparently continues to happen in the book from what I've read is that um, she felt like pressured into making up crushes. And I don't know how many of y'all have felt like you had to say who you had a crush on, or pretend to have a crush, or even convinced yourself that you had a crush. I didn't. I didn't do anything like that last, but I definitely just like would be like, yeah, I like that boy. When I was in school, it's like you were supposed to have an answer. You were supposed to like somebody. I'm like, I don't know what I would do if I was alone with them. I don't even know him. I think his hair is cool. you know, I like the way he plays the cello or whatever. Whoever it was. So, but anyway, some of the people reading the book felt like there wasn't enough room to breathe with the way the character's asexuality was presented. Meaning, like, her experience was the ace experience, and therefore is the most common and the most definitive. I don't know, particularly the sex repulsion. being conflated with being ace and aro. She had, like she has sort of judgy thoughts about, like, "Oh, sex eclipses everything, and it's meaningless to me, so I'm gonna be really sour about it, I guess." Some of the more sexual characters in the book, especially, like, one pansexual character, gets framed like, they're less moral or, presented like their sexual needs are coping mechanisms for personality problems, which I haven't seen how that's framed yet. I don't know if I'll agree, but that's something that's been said. And aromanticism isn't all that well, uh, explained, I guess. Um, it's not well defined because it seems to be sort of lumped in with the asexuality and not as something people of other sexual orientations can also be. So there was another ace and aro person in the story. I think they were non-binary as well. Um, and that person doesn't really get their own version of asexuality to contrast or compare with hers. It was more like they're a support person who kind of helps her get context for herself, but we don't really get to hear their story. I don't know. That's what some people said they had a problem with as well. Um, it's all focused on Georgia herself being helped through that discovery, and some people didn't like that when she talks about the meaningfulness of friendship for herself, that it's almost presented like, oh, asexual people are uniquely qualified to be able to have the best of friendships because of not having other kinds. Like, "Ugh." But again, I don't know if that's how I'll take that. We'll see as I get through it. Um, it's obviously not a uniquely asexual thing to be able to have deep friendships that you may even prioritize above your romantic relationships in some cases. Um, I think also part of the problem with Georgia portraying everyone around her as singularly obsessed with sex and relationships is probably just partly because she's a she's a teenager, and that's how I remember what being a teenager was like too. People were always talking about this. It was never far from the conversation, right? Like this was life, right? So, I don't know. But what else can I say about it? I do worry about asexual people reading a book that might make them feel like they're not asexual if they don't relate to this or that this doesn't describe their experience. But I do think some of the things that Georgia does and thinks are things people might say and think at that level of discovery, that level of maturity in their lives. So I guess it is your mileage may vary situation. So, what else can we check in with the chat about? I'm glad some people here seem to agree with me about there needs to be more books about friendship. Yes, yes. Um, so one person has an interesting question, which I'll take a break to talk about also, is did any of us identify with other identities before being identified as ace? I didn't. um, because I called myself non-sexual by the time I was 15 or whatever. Um, but yeah. Well, whatever. I do feel like back when OkCupid, where I like to make friends on OkCupid because they allow it, when they only had very limited options, I picked bisexual on there because that meant that I could get matched with everyone. So, uh, I also I identify as asexual, I identify as aromantic, and I identify as queer. So let's talk about the next book, which is called "Let's Talk About Love" by Claire Kann. And that is about a girl who is named Alice. Um, I guess she's actually a young woman, not really a girl. Because I think it is takes place in college. This is one I haven't read, obviously. She is looking forward to having an awesome summer, doing awesome summer things, and, making some money working in a library, but, she recently broke up with her girlfriend because she was asexual, like, that they broke up over that, and she kind of felt like, "Well, dating is off the table, I'm not gonna do it, and things won't work out because people won't wanna date me," or whatever, and then she meets Takumi, who is a great friend, and she doesn't wanna risk the friendship, but she thinks it might be different flavor than friendship, and she's not sure if maybe she should go back on her non-dating intentions, and she worries that Takumi would not accept her. So that's kind of that situation. Alice, the protagonist, is very much identified as asexual on the page, and so she comes out to her girlfriend and gets dumped. And when she falls for Takumi, she's kind of dealing with all of these adulthood situations, making decisions about that line between friendship and romance, which a lot of us have questions about that, right? I mean, I don't, obviously it's not just us, but when somebody asks me to like define romantic attraction, it's just kind of like, well, I mean, I'm maybe not the person who should be telling you that because I'm a romantic, but a lot of people will say like it when you feel it, and I'm like, I guess I haven't felt it because I didn't know it. So, but anyway, I guess the character Alice is biromantic, and some readers seem to think the ending of the book was weird, like that it might have implied that Alice wasn't struggling with how asexuality was relevant in the relationship by the end, like that it seemed almost like a typical relationship by the end. But that's kind of like, I mean, to be fair, that's kind of what it looks like from the outside. Like if you're an asexual person in a relationship with a non-asexual person, and nobody knows the details of like how you negotiated your intimacy, or that you had to a certain extent that is maybe more extensive than most other people, like that's kind of how it looks. So I don't know, but I know a lot of people also appreciated that Alice was a black woman who was a geek and wasn't there to be sassy or stereotypical. So yes to more representation of that type. So let's see. I am going to try to talk about this one. Shannon McGuire is an author who has written a lot of good stuff, so I have heard, and it is the Ace related book is called Every Heart a Doorway, this is like a fantasy novella. It's pretty short, and it's about people who have spent time in fantasy worlds and ended up back in like the regular world, and now they're at like this school where they're adjusting to life, and some of them are trying to get back to their fantasy worlds because that's like where they felt at home, but they're all like people who are not adjusting super well to being back. And there's also like a murder mystery going on after the protagonist gets there, and she and the other kids who went to like darker fantasy lands are cast in suspicion by those who went to like more whimsical worlds. So the character is Nancy, and she is explicitly confirmed to be asexual on the page. Nancy's asexuality is relevant to who she is as a character, but it's not a plot element at all. And it informs how she interacts with people, and sometimes she is confused about it, and sometimes other people are confused about it, but it's incidental as far as the plot goes, and it isn't being used to, like, shoehorn anything in. The story is not at all about her being asexual, and it's a lot less relevant than a lot of the other, like, weirder things about her. So a lot of people like this kind of creepy, gothy vibe. But some people didn't like that Nancy was associated with death. She had like a I guess she went to like a world that was about death, and um, some people kind of didn't like necessarily that didn't know if it was necessarily smart to have an ace character with a connection to the absence of life. I feel like it takes all kinds. Like, I mean, a gothy kind of ace person, they're out there. They're absolutely out there. So, I mean, I don't have a problem with that. Again, it's a it's a representation thing where once we get plenty more of them, every one of them will have less of an impact on the overall understanding of aces as people. So, but that's what I know about that. I don't know very much about that one. I like Sean and McGuire on everything that I know about her. So, anyway, let's see. There's another book that here's another one I don't know very much about called Upside Down, and it's by N.R. Walker. So the summary I have for you on this one is that it's about two guys named Jordan and Hennessy, and they are both asexual. Mm. So they have both had their asexuality be a sticking point in previous relationships, but one of them is like a little more established. He like runs an asexuality support group, and the other one kind of like comes into the support group like newly realizing he's ace, and so he's hoping that maybe he can find peace with the label as well as maybe a relationship that fits. And Jordan and Hennessy are both identified as asexual on the page. And what's really cool about this, besides the fact that it's an ace ace relationship and it's a male male relationship, is that Jordan is having his asexual awakening at age 26. And I mean, obviously, some of us have it much later in life than that, but it's also just it's nice to see people who are not adolescents going through it, because the whole figuring out your sexuality thing is often in these YA novels, and this is somebody who is getting close to 30, it's nice to see that, because I mean, we're out here, like people who are participating in the ace community and stuff who are not college kids. Anyway, so it's really cool to see ace characters who have struggled actually like finding each other. And almost every ace related story is like an ace character trying to negotiate a relationship with a non-ace character. And so it's kind of nice to see when they're both ace, you don't see that many of them. And it's not that they don't still have differences and compromise and stuff like that, but it's just they're both gay aces, and both of them like they're not repulsed by sexual content, but they don't wanna have sex. Neither of them want sex at all. Um, and there's, like, a lot of explicit asexuality related conversation, because obviously some of it is about Jordan, like, finding his asexuality, and so there's, like, some straightforward, like, education. Um, and so it's supposed to include, aro people too in the support group, but there's not really anything about that, so that's maybe a downside, but, it's, um it's a romance with no sex, and that's unusual in, like, the romance book world. Um, but anyway, the author identifies as gray sexual or somewhere on the ace spectrum. Um, there's a short quote that I saw, where it says, "I really am asexual, and it hit me like a metric fuck ton of bricks that there's actually nothing wrong with me." I like that. Nice little affirmation, but also just the idea of kind of feeling like you just got hit with bricks. Like, this whole time, there's been nothing wrong. That's very meaningful. I love that. All right. I've got a few more. Let's see. Want to check in with the chat though. Oop, it's a little bit after 9. That means I've been talking for an hour and a half. Thank you everyone for coming also. Um, let's see what people are saying. Mm, looks like there's some nice spirited discussion going on in this chat for those who watch this later. Hmm. Yeah, I agree with one of the people who says that imperfect books, all books are imperfect and no representation is going to be perfect. As long as it isn't harmful, I don't really mind a lot. So thank you for that. Yeah, I agree. I think that some people did feel like they I don't know, they were very put off by some of the things in the book, but, I guess several of these books, but I can't say what my perspective is yet because I am on page 23. But this book was actually given to me by someone who disliked it. They didn't want it anymore, so, um, mm, which, we'll see. We'll see what I think. Mm. Well, I'm going to tell you about another book, and it is called How to Be a Normal Person. And the summary I can tell you is a protagonist, I think, is named Gustavo. Gustavo, what a name. He's a pretty big weirdo, and he likes it that way. And then a person named Casey takes an interest in him. And so he might try to be normal for him, for Casey. Casey is the asexual character, and that is confirmed in the story. It's apparently a pretty funny book if you like that kind of humor. Um, I forget. I didn't write down who this is by, and now I've forgotten. I just have like this very haphazard list. Um, but now that I've been reviewing these, uh, that one is not in my head anymore. How to Be a Normal Person by TJ Klune. So anyway, people who reviewed this book were talking about how funny it is, and then there were other people who were like, I don't like this kind of humor. So I guess it's your mileage may vary again. There's also a lot of drug references. So if you don't dig the stoner humor type thing, maybe not for you. But it's another male romance, and this time it is between a non-ace person and an ace person. They don't do any of the usual nonsense where they try to fix the ace person or treat him like the romance isn't real if he's ace or won't have sex. Um, but also, Gustavo like is an introvert, and he's the one who's not asexual, whereas like the stoner ace guy is an extrovert. So it's kind of nice to see that dynamic not like fall into the usual stereotypes. So I don't really know very much about how the relationship goes, but I assume it's kind of fun to find out. Um, The next one I want to share with you, I almost didn't because I felt like I had a hard time kind of figuring out what this book is about without having read it. But I'm going to tell you about the book The Bone People, which gets cited a lot in like early representations of like, are there any books with asexual characters? But the book The Bone People is by Carrie Home, and it's about like a mixed race woman who lives in a tower in New Zealand, like very isolated, and then connects with a mute boy with a hurt foot that she finds in the tower and kind of bonds with him and his adoptive father. Um, the character is Kieran, and it is not confirmed. The asexuality is not really like confirmed in words in the story, but the author confirmed it and is Ace and Arrow herself. So it's apparently kind of a surreal book. It's it's got some people like it and some don't. There's a lot of like it's like people found it hard to read. There's a lot of alcohol abuse, a lot of child abuse. It's just a lot of hard to read stuff. but it's also got some really interesting, like, stuff with Maori myths and, vocabulary, philosophy from Maori, um, culture, and, the story has, like, a lot of really weird sort of surrealism toward the end, especially, perspective shifts, questionable, like, I don't know, perspectives, I don't know. People, like, found it really just it's like an artistically rendered book, and it confused a lot of people, I think. But, Carolyn has been living by herself for a really long time and trying to, like, "I'm an artist, I'm a painter, but not painting," how many of us can relate to that? And, develops this relationship with the child named Simon and the, adoptive father, Joe, and, Joe likes the main character in, like, a I guess, a partner-like way, but they don't have a sexual relationship, and she takes on kind of a parental role with the child, which, you also don't see a lot in stories that have an asexual character, like, you don't see a lot of mature people, you don't see a lot of them with children, like, just that's an interesting dynamic, and it does discuss, like, isolation and relationships, like, it's nice to have some adult, non-romantic, non-sexual relationship discussed in depth, and also some Ace Arrow content from before the modern era. I think this was published in, like, 1984, so that's refreshing. I do have a quote for you from the characters having a conversation. The guy asks her, says, "Are you afraid of kissing, of men?" She says, "I don't like kissing." And after a little bit more chat, he asks, "I wondered, did anyone ever, hurt you? So you don't like kissing? Love?" She says, "Nope." He says, "I thought maybe someone had been bad to you in the past, and that's why you don't like people touching or holding you." Ah, damn it to hell. She bangs the lamp down on the desk and the flame jumps wildly. "I said no. I haven't been raped or jilted or abused in any fashion. There's nothing in my background to explain the way I am." She steadies her voice, taking the impatience out of it. "I'm the odd one out, the peculiarity in my family. Because they're all normal and demonstrably physically, but ever since I can remember, I've disliked close contact, charged contact, emotional contact, as well as any overtly sexual contact. I veer away from it because it always feels like the other person is draining something out of me. I know that's irrational, but that's the way I feel." She touches the lamp, and the flaring flame stills. "I spent a considerable amount of time when I was an adolescent wondering why I was different, whether there were other people like me. Why, when everyone else was fascinated by their developing sexual nature, I couldn't give a damn. I've never been attracted to men or women or anything else. It's difficult to explain, and nobody has ever believed it when I've tried to explain. But while I have an apparently normal female body, I don't have a sexual urge or appetite. I think I am a neuter," which that's interesting that she kind of uses a something that I associate more with gender for neuter. I don't know, but um, I've also heard that as like somebody who's actually been like castrated. But anyway, it's also 1984, so I mean, a lot of us used words that don't have the meaning that they actually have. Like a lot of us kind of adopted words. So that was what the author did and what the character did. Ay. So let's see. Um, Gonna check in with the chat again. Hmm. Oh gosh, there's so much here. Y'all are chatting up a storm. Um, well, let's see if there's anything I need to jump into before I talk about the next one. Oh, um, okay. Someone mentioned a book that I haven't got on the list. A Japanese book called Convenience Store Woman, and it says I think the main character is Ace, so that's cool. Someone else talks about writing fanfic sometimes. writing a character to be ace. And yeah, I'm going to tell you about the next one on my list, which is a book called Demonosity by Amanda Ashby. That is a teen paranormal romance. I didn't like by this point in my list, I was just kind of like, okay, I'm not going to try to read summaries and figure out what the heck it's about to say it in my own words. I'm actually just going to cheat and read you the description. So, this book, Demonosity, it says the Black Rose, a powerful ancient force, has been let loose and has taken up residence in Celeste Gibson, popular girl, at Cassidy Carter Lewis's high school. Thomas Delacroix is the spirit of a 14th century knight who is devoted to protecting the Black Rose, but he needs a contemporary living being to take on the challenge. That's where Cassidy comes in. She's a quirky high school junior who just wants to dress in her vintage clothes, hang out with her best friend, take care of her father who is recovering from surgery. She's the last person who would ever volunteer for such a task, but no one actually asked her. Now, like it or not, she finds herself training before dawn and battling demons at parties, the mall, even at school. But hey, no one ever said high school was going to be easy. So apparently, her best friend is a character named Nash, and he is the asexual character. Nash is her asexual best friend that nobody tries to change in the story. He's also another very hot character that's always turning down sexual interest, and he has known he was asexual since he was a preteen, which is cool. Um, Here's a quote from it. Girls always looked at Nash with interest, and so did a lot of guys for that matter, because the simple truth was that with his pale blue eyes, sooty lashes, and alabaster skin, which looked as if it had been carved from marble, Nash Peterson was a divine specimen of heavenly perfection. Not to mention a certified genius, and someone had to be dead not to admire him. Unfortunately, they might as well be dead for the good their attention to Nash would do them, since at the age of 12, Nash had just declared that he was asexual, and despite all the interest he attracted wherever he went, 4 years later, he hadn't shown any signs of changing his mind. Interesting seeing how an asexual person is seen through the eyes of someone who is not, because it's like it's presented as a possible change of mind, it's presented as unfortunately for others, blah, blah, so ace best friend, I'll take it. And he does later in the story just explicitly talk about being asexual, like that someone was coming on to him and he's like, I said I was asexual or whatever. She doesn't seem to know the meaning of that. Let's see. Wow. I've got like one, two, three, four, five more here, but they're a little short. Um, so I should mention Guardian of the Dead by Karen Healy. This is one I've seen on lists for years. It's a young adult urban fantasy. Um, Ellie is the character, lives in New Zealand, and she gets magic. She has to fight some magic creatures to stop an island from sinking. And the Ace character is named Kevin, and it's confirmed in story that Kevin is Ace. So that is also a one of those asexual best friend stories. He comes out, and Ellie thinks he'll change his mind, and yeah, so there's that. The character is not like a standoffish or cold kind of character. Lots of girls like him in the story. We don't get a lot of details about his asexuality, though. You see him turning down a girl romantically and stating that he's asexual. So there's a maybe conflation there. I don't have a lot more information about that, but that's one that I've seen people talk about. Another one I just want to mention very quickly is a comic book, actually. Do you know that Marvel did like a Pride thing? And in Pride #1 from this year, there was in Marvel Voices, there was a story called "Everything's Coming Up Aces," and the summary is that Gwenpool plans a Pride party, and Gwenpool is the Ace Arrow character. Confirmed on the page, Gwenpool is Ace and Arrow, and she says it right there and says, "I'll be Marvel's Ace icon," which is cool. I like Gwenpool. I have read a couple other stories about her before I knew that she was Ace, so that's cool. Um, so let me tell you about a Mercedes Lackey book. The the Oathbound. I want to just say this with a line of caution. I almost kind of dropped this one from my list, but I think it's important that we talk about problematic examples. So the Oathbound by Mercedes Lackey. Some people really, really like this because it's got like a focus on a two women's relationship, and it's intimate in certain ways, but they're not like together. Um, Summary. Okay, Tarma witnessed her forced marriage and became an adept for power to the greatest good. When Kethri obtains a magical sword which draws her to others in need, the two vow to avenge the wrongs done to womanhood. Tarma is the ace character, but it's magically induced. It's part of like an oath, and even though after the oath is taken and she has no desires, romantic or sexual, it's like, it's nice to see a character living that life and not seeming to regret anything, and doesn't want to go back to how she was or anything, but it's still like, you know, it's presented as something that was done to her magically, you know? And some people like that, there's this important female-female relationship not centered on sex in the story, but I've heard a lot of stuff about how the magically induced asexuality is conflated with like sexlessness, like that she's not really seen as feminine, which is, I don't have to tell you how problematic that is. And there's an awful lot of connecting female sexuality with assault trauma. So, I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff. I hear that most of it is implied, not described in detail, but it's still there, and there's a lot of it. It doesn't really seem like the good aspects would be outweighed by the bad in this one, but I wanted to mention it because some people in our community really liked it. I will not be reading that. I don't think I can handle that much of that. Um, let's see. So, what else can I tell you? I'll tell you about Clariel. That's a Garth Nix book. Clariel is the daughter of one of the most notable families in the Old Kingdom, with blood relations to the Aborson and most important to the king. She dreams of living a simple life, but discovers this is hard to achieve when a dangerous free magic creature is loose in the city. Her parents want to marry her off to a killer, and there is a plot brewing against the old and withdrawn King Orican. When Clariel is drawn into the efforts to find and capture the creature, she finds hidden sorcery within herself, yet it is magic that carries great dangers. Can she rise above the temptation of power, escape the unwanted marriage, and save the king? So this is not explicitly an on-screen confirmation of asexuality, but she specifically says, I have no interest in sex. I have no interest in romance. The character Clariel is, you know, ace and arrow in every sense except for not using those words. So, well, I shouldn't completely conflate the interest in sex with, but she abstains from everything associated with that and is very vocal about it, apparently. There's no love interest in the book. She's clearly thought through her perspective on this, even though she's very young, and that's relatable. And she has actually considered whether she might have those feelings, but they never surfaced for her. And unfortunately, there are people who say that they don't find Clariel to be relatable or likable. She's not like a love to hate her kind of character or a villain or anything, but some people have said she's really judgy, or she seems to like hate people. She's like a misanthrope, and it's like connecting that attitude with asexuality can sometimes be problematic, but I don't know. I mean, depending on how it was handled, I mean, I could get down with somebody who was just not cheerful about things. It's, you're allowed to both be that and be asexual. Um, all right, I'm going to tell you about Banner of the Damned by Sherwood Smith, which, again, I just have the summary from like the back of the book. Emrys is the most diligent of students, and she wants nothing more than to become royal scribe for the intelligent and beautiful Princess Lasfa, and Emrys gets her wish. But life becomes complicated in ways she never could have foreseen, for though Emrys adores the princess, she has been charged with a secret mission for the queen to search her new home for signs of the evil magical influence of Norsunder, a kingdom once thought legendary, but now known to be real. Emrys knows nothing of magic, but finds a knowledgeable and willing tutor in the barbaric land of Marlovin Hessia. Was the queen right? Is there a connection between Norsunder and Marlovin Hessia? And if Emrys was acting on orders from her queen, why is she now on trial? So Emrys is the ace character. I don't know if they use that word. I wasn't able to figure it out. So maybe no, but she doesn't have a love interest in the story. So maybe Ace Arrow. She has. It's one of those fantasy worlds where like there's a lot of queer people, so it's not like weird at all for someone to be outside the norm with that. So that is the that's the end of my book list. I'm trying to remember if I left anything out that I was going to talk about, but I guess I probably covered most of them. So yeah, what else can I say? I just want to kind of wrap up, like talking about. Well, first of all, I don't remember any characters there who were ace and non-binary. I would like to see more of that. I would like to see some non-binary and trans ace characters. But I feel like there was an article I read once by Shannon Hale, who, as far as I know, I don't think that she has tried any ace characters, but she writes mostly stories with girls in them, and she tends to like to include a lot of diversity. And she talked about how when she would put like quote too much diversity on one character, she would get comments from publishers and editors and stuff like, oh, isn't this just too much other? How is she going to be relatable to anyone? And meanwhile, people who have those identities all lumped into one person, like we've been asked to relate to characters who are nothing like us for our whole lives. So like, why are we so special? Why are we so good at it? Right. I mean, we are by now. But she'd written a protagonist who was, I think she was like bilingual, mixed race, female and disabled. I can't remember whether she had some other identities that were considered a divergence from straight white able-bodied men. Uh, but yeah, she wrote about the author had written about how if you start kind of combining a lot of marginalized identities, you'll start to get pushback, like who is this for? Who is this relatable to? And the response to that is like, we want to not only have people who have these identities who are out there to find characters like them, but we also want everybody else to feel this being normalized, to be able to understand people with those identities, even if they have a lot of them that are different from what we're typically used to seeing in mainstream media, that they learn to relate to them and see them as people too, see them as part of our world. And so I'm sure that the people who probably wouldn't read our books anyway would be out there saying like, "Oh, you made a demisexual, biromantic, lesbian, Afro-Cuban, non-binary person, and like, who is this for?" It's like it's woke, whatever. And I'm like, well, I mean, I bet I just described someone who will watch this video. So I mean, why does that person never get a book? Never. So anyway, I think that it's, it's something that we need. We need to have more diversity on more axes. with incorporation of different stripes of, micro labels within asexuality and aromanticism. Um, I would love to see more of that, and I would love to see less of this tendency to make the person relatable in every other way. You may have noticed that I called out, like, it's this character is very hot and lots of people like him, and that was something that we talked about in the early days of asexual activism, of like the unassailable asexual, where you had to be to avoid people finding you to be off-putting or too different or whatever, that you had to have all these qualities to be a good spokesperson. This was not something that we actually said you should do if you're a spokesperson. It was something that was observed, that the people who kind of rose to prominence, a lot of them, the only difference they had from just about everyone else was that they were asexual, and then all these other things about them were not threatening, I say with big air quotes. Um, but that does not reflect the reality of the ace community and the aro community and all of the spectrum. It really doesn't. And the times that I have gone to conferences, you do see you see a lot of diversity, especially when it comes to um, racial diversity and ability diversity. There were a lot of people with disabilities at these. There were a lot of people who were not white, and that reflects the reality of our community. We need to have those stories. We need more of them out there. And obviously, the best source for those is if we ourselves are writing them. So, um, I know a lot of us are just kind of like writing fanfic or writing novels that we pass around to our friends, and we don't actually approach publication or whatever. But like, I feel like we really need your stories. We need them to be out there because um, we need it to be authentic. And I'm sure that it's not just about like, oh, we need a story about this kind of person. It's that that kind of person has stories to tell that haven't been told. It's more than just some boxes you can tick. You really do have a different way of looking at the world than the one that gets fed back to us in media. It's a valuable perspective, and it's valuable both to give to the world and for you to have the chance to say those things and to be innovative, to be heard, to be appreciated. So, um, I would love this list to get a lot longer. And I hope that some of you are prepared to go there with me. And uh, if not, uh, I'm sure you'll be out there reading and watching. So, yeah, um, I'm gonna check in with this chat. We're at 9:30, so I'm right about at the window that I'll want to start wrapping up soon. But I just want to check in with the people who are talking just to see if there's anything that I should cover before we go, or anything I should read out to people who are not looking at the chat playback. Um, well, I like what this person is saying. Fan fiction is also fun, doesn't need to reflect reality. For example, people do not smell like flowers, fruits, or grass. That's just not how people work. Yes, it's true. I've heard about those tropes. Someone says, isn't Black Widow also ace? I don't know. I would love to know that. All right. What else? Oh, some people are here at very strange times for them, so staying up late for it. Um, hmm. Someone has written, "Is love the answer?" Delves a little into gender too, if I'm remembering it correctly. That's great. I love that. This person also says delves into agender a bit. So the three A's. I love that. Okay, great, great. That's super. I thought I read something about that. Yeah, that sounds familiar. Is love the answer? Hmm. Cool. Yeah. Um, I've had so many of these on my to read list for such a long time. Oh, So, hmm. Still reading some of the comments here. Sorry for the silence. Mm. Someone wants to know if I'm still writing a comic, and I started a web comic in 2005 that was weekly, and I am still writing it every Friday. It posts. I had to post it earlier today, and I started another one in 2012 that's about being a writer, and that one only comes out once a month. So, but that one is still coming out every month. I'm not as strict about that one. Like if it's a little bit late or I just don't quite get to it on the 30th or 31st, the last day of the month, then like that one I'm not as worried about. But the one that I started in 2005, I'm religious about it. So I've never been late, and I've never missed an issue. Um, so I think there might have been one time where it was technically hit the internet late because the, access to the web space was broken. Like, the website was actually down, but that doesn't count. I was ready. So, but yeah, um, that is, unrelated to asexuality mostly. My writing comic, which is called, So You Write, does occasionally, because it's autobiographical mostly, it's, like, exaggeratedly autobiographical, and I make some references to being an asexual activist in it sometimes and being an asexual writer and, writing about absurd things like people thinking that you can't write romance if you're an aromantic author. I'm like, "Yes, I can." Romance is not like the one thing in human experience that a person who's never experienced it couldn't possibly get right. I mean, like, first of all, I've been fed a steady diet of that for my whole life. I think I know how you'll write it. Number 2, there's plenty of people who have experienced it who write some really crappy romance fiction, so I don't think that is the thing, that guarantees anything. And number 3, I write science fiction and fantasy. I can try to make you think that I know what it's like to experience things a person cannot experience. So, I'm pretty good at least trying to imagine being, in a different situation, like, writing not as me, and then it's fine, it's easy. So, mm. But, at the same time, I also like to have people test read for me and make sure, that this doesn't ring false, just because I'm from a couple of marginalized backgrounds and have had a lot of practice trying to relate to mainstream stuff does not guarantee that I do it right. So obviously I still have to check in with people, and that's what test readers are for. And people have been very generous, I guess, with their willingness to understand that I'm not gonna be able to bring my own, feelings in relationships to the romantic relationships I'm writing, but people seem to have, like, people seem to think that I do a pretty good job with the romances that I have written, and they're different. They're all different from each other. I mean, I don't every character is different, so everybody's gonna react differently. So, alright. Um, well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I actually have to go bake some cupcakes, so I have a birthday party to go to tomorrow, so yeah, but I am going to just wait and see if there's any, any last, questions, or if anybody wants to throw out anything that they want me to mention or talk about. I will wait, like, a couple more minutes, um, but I'll just say, I don't do this every Ace Week. I think I didn't do it last year. I just was a little slammed. But I really like that we have Ace Week and that we moved away from calling it Asexual Awareness Week, because it's like, let's move past just awareness, right? Um, I was joking to one of my friends. I was like, "Hey, did you know it's Ace Week?" And he's like, "Oh, no, I didn't." And I was like, Are you aware? Are you aware of asexual? It's funny. So, um, yay. I appreciate everyone who showed up, who wandered in, who stayed for some of it or all of it. Uh, and of course, people who want to watch this later on my channel, they will get to have the whole replay. I'll see what I can do about providing some subtitles. I subtitle all of my videos myself, so I should be able to maybe get that up sometime soonish. It's much harder for the live stream ones because I generally am not going off a script or anything, so I don't have anything prepared. And it's been over 2 hours, so it's gonna be long. My previous ones, I think, were all longer than this. I'm not sure. I had one that went, like, over 3 hours. It's ridiculous. So, but, we were talking about a lot of stuff. Alright, so let me go ahead and wrap up. I appreciate all the kind words people have left me in the chat. Thanks so much. Um, yeah, and I make, a new video about once a month. I try to make it toward the end of the month. I make usually Letters to an Asexual is the one that I do. Most of those is me, like, reading ignorant statements and stuff, but sometimes it's people who write in asking for advice or, "Can you talk about this?" So those letters get read too. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you next time, and, yeah, have a great rest of Ace Week, everyone. Alright, bye-bye.